Hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webcast. My name's Andrew Barber. I'm a senior contributing editor here at eSchool News, and I'll be acting as the moderator for today's presentation, which is sponsored by Riverbed Xerus. Now, over the next hour, we're going to discuss E-rate program updates and also offer some guidance to help schools and libraries successfully navigate the E-rate program. And in particular, we're going to explore what's new about E-rate for 2018 and ways to maximize E-rate funding. And we're also going to examine E-rate eligible Wi-Fi solutions that integrate with Google Apps and Microsoft Office 365. Now, before I introduce our speakers and we dive into that discussion, let me take just a few moments to talk about the console that you're looking at and explain a couple of items. First, we are going to be recording the event. In a day or so, we'll send you an email that will contain a link to the recording, and you'll also be able to download a PDF of the presentation from that same email. And second, please ask questions. Don't feel as if you have to wait until the end. At any time during the presentation, if you have a question, just type it into the Q&A box on your console and hit the submit button. We will be fielding questions throughout the course of the presentation, and then we'll also take time at the end to go through the remaining questions. We also have a chat function which you can launch. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, there's a blue group chat icon down there. Click on that and use chat to talk among yourselves, compare notes about E-rate and Wi-Fi solutions, or to contact me or the eSchool News team if you have any technical problems. But I do have one favor to ask. Please don't use the chat function to ask questions of our speakers. They're not going to have time to look at that group chat while they're presenting. So if you have a question for them, please do use that Q&A panel instead. And finally, I want to draw your attention to the resource list panel on your console, where we have listed a whole bunch of videos and PDFs that can give you more background on both the E-rate program as well as case studies about Wi-Fi implementations at a whole variety of educational institutions. And with that all out of the way, let me introduce today's speakers. John Harrington is the CEO of Funds for Learning, which is the nation's first and largest professional services firm specializing in the E-rate program. And since 1997, John and his firm have provided support to thousands of E-rate stakeholders nationwide and have helped schools and libraries apply for more than $1.25 billion in E-rate funding. Our other speaker today is Bruce Miller, who's Vice President of Product Marketing for Riverbed Xerus. And Bruce has more than 25 years of experience bringing telecommunications products to market. And at Riverbed, he leads product marketing and management functions for Wi-Fi solutions. And prior to Riverbed's acquisition of Xerus, Bruce worked with Xerus for 10 years in a variety of marketing and customer support management roles. And Bruce holds a BS in electrical engineering from Caltech. Welcome, John and Bruce. I mean, it's a real pleasure to have you here today. Bruce, why don't you get us started?
Great. Thank you, Andrew, and welcome to everybody on the webinar today. Just a quick look at the agenda. I'm going to do a quick introduction to kind of kick things off and then pass it over to John for the bulk of the discussion around E-rate 2018 and how you can optimize your activities towards receiving funding from the program. And then I'll come back on to talk a little bit about some of the solutions that are E-rate eligible for that. So just to kind of introduce things briefly here to start, we have been in the educational space as a vendor, Xerus, for over 10 years, enabling technology in schools. It is our number one market in terms of our business as far as putting Wi-Fi out there and getting students online, allowing them to access different resources and supporting a lot of the different initiatives for the 21st century classroom. There's many, many ways that schools are leveraging technology today, and we really see wireless access as the on-ramp, the enabler for many of those technologies when they're accessing them on their unique devices. So that's a given, and one of the things that's, I think, key to the overall solution is just ensuring that those things work. I've seen too many times when technology can be an impediment and then student or teachers will revert back to regular whiteboards and regular learning techniques. So one of the things we really focus on is ensuring that technology is rock solid and enables learning as opposed to being a detriment to it. And what we've seen historically is that as we've sold these solutions over time, there's a big disparity between the haves and have-nots, the schools that can afford technology and those that do not. And the U.S. Government has stepped up with a program over many years to enable technology into these schools. And that's really why we're here today, is to talk about how you can best leverage E-Rate funding. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to John Harrington, who is the CEO of Funds for Learning, and we're a pleasure to have John on the line here to walk us through the E-Rate program. John?
Thank you, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I want to, first of all, just thank eSchool News for bringing this conversation together. Having done E-Rate work and applications for many years, oftentimes I see that the difference between success or falling short really has to do with education, and understanding the rules and having this type of dialogue really makes the difference. So thank you, eSchool News, and also for Riverbed Xerus for helping sponsor this event today. I want to spend our time looking at 5 general steps for how you maximize E-Rate funding in 2018. For many of you, you may be new to the E-Rate program, you're not sure where things stand today, or even if you have, just sort of getting oriented for the next steps in the program. Right now, we are preparing for the funding year 2018. Now, that starts July 1st, 2018, and it extends through June 30th, 2019, but really the work has already begun planning and preparing for 2018. The procurement and planning process for next year's applications is already well underway in many of the applicants nationwide that are that I would consider best practices for effectively leveraging the E-Rate program. So we are right now preparing for this next funding year, looking at the Category 2 funding requests, releasing procurement, and beginning to take steps to really maximize the opportunity next year. Meanwhile, we are in the midst of the 2017 funding year. So that officially kicked off last July. It extends through June 30th for recurring services. And many of you, about 40% of applications, have received funding commitments already. And if so, there are additional steps, payment paperwork that needs to be submitted and completed, and others, of course, are still under review. If you're in that camp, if you've got an application for 2017 that is still under review, don't worry, you're not alone. USAC has been diligently working through all those applications. The main thing you want to do right now is make sure that you are watching for any inquiries, any requests for additional information that USAC may send your direction. You want to be responsive to those and get those answers to USAC so that they have the information necessary so that they can complete review of that 2017 application. And once you do get that application funded, make sure you complete that Form 486. That's the form that notifies USAC that work has begun, and it opens the door for actual payments to be submitted and processed by USAC. Finally, we are also in the process of wrapping up the 2016 funding year. There is a deadline at the end of October for the payment paperwork associated with recurring services like your internet access or telephone service. Those bills all need to be submitted to USAC by the end of October if you are in the process of seeking reimbursement. You may also be in the process of completing any one-time work associated with the 2016 funding year. For many of those applications, there's a deadline of September 30th to complete that work, depending upon when the funding commitment was released. Every situation is sort of different, so the big takeaway right there is just to make sure that you know where things stand with your 2016 application and also your 2017 as we now kind of transition to talking about preparing for the 2018 funding year. So 2018 is a going to be, I think, a great year for the E-rate program. There is about $4 billion available for schools and libraries nationwide. And, with many school districts and library systems suffering budget crunches and tight wallets, knowing that there is this source of funding out there that can provide support is, of course, encouraging. Remember, the E-rate program now provides not just support for internet access and telecommunications, but there are designated funds for internal connections to on-campus Wi-Fi and network switches and so on. And those dollars are there literally for the asking. In addition to that, we have still the opportunity to purchase self-provision networks, fiber optic wide area networks. It's a relatively new opportunity that school systems and libraries are considering. So as you're looking at and planning and preparing for your 2018 application, you may also want to look at that. And don't forget, telephone service is currently scheduled to be phased out of the E-rate program. The vast majority of applicants will no longer receive a discount on their telephone service beginning in 2018. If you take your school or your library system's discount rate and then subtract 80% from that, you'll get your 2018 telephone service E-rate discount. Unfortunately, it doesn't go below 0, but for many of you it will be set at 0. And that's important to know as you're planning your 2018 application. Obviously, you may or may not want to submit an application for telephone service. Also, in terms of your budgeting, planning, financial awareness for 2018, you should just know that that phone service will either not be there in a discounted form or it'll be greatly reduced from what you've previously experienced. And last but not least, in 2018, we see that the E-rate portal, EPC, is still in place that USAC rolled out several years ago. They have been working on improving the system. It's still not the most user-friendly system, but it's sort of the system we know right now. And by and large, I would say that no changes to the EPC system, no significant changes. It's probably to our advantage as applicants completing the paperwork that we sort of know what we have to work with as we head into this 2018 funding year. So with all that, I want to now focus on 5 areas that I think really will help you as you prepare for the 2018 funding year. Understanding the process is so important. Again, these dollars are there, available, but only if you really leverage that opportunity and step into it. Oftentimes we kind of hear the term E-rate thrown around, and I think it's always important to just step back for a moment and reflect on why does this program matter so much. And the fact is that E-rate dollars are helping to provide faster internet access to almost every school and library system in the United States. It's the largest single source of education technology funding, and it provides support to both public and private schools, as well as public library systems. These E-rate funds come in the form of discounts ranging from 20% all the way up to 90% on certain types of eligible goods and services. And as I mentioned, again, the program provides about $4 billion of potential support each year to schools and libraries. So what does the process look like? Where do these E-rate funds come from, and how are you able to access them? Well, it really starts by first understanding what your needs are. Remember, the E-rate program, it's a discount program, and so it's available to you for purchases for things that you need. So really understanding what it is your library system needs. Where are you at in the adoption curve or implementation curve for technology? As a school system, where are you in terms of deploying Wi-Fi and getting laptops into students' hands? So understanding where you're at then gives you that opportunity to go out to bid, to ask for solutions, to seek bids for goods and services that address those needs. And in terms of the E-rate program, that is done via something called the Form 470. We'll talk a bit more about that a little later. After you have competitively bid and selected your contracts, then you sign those agreements and submit a funding application, something called the Form 471. The Form 471 is sort of like submitting your tax paperwork. You get all your information, you send that in, the application is reviewed, and then after that funding commitment arrives, you can actually begin to receive the discounts and the services, and then finally submit payment paperwork. That whole process takes anywhere from 12 to 18 to 24 months, just depending upon what types of goods and services are being procured, how early you start the planning. As I mentioned, right now we are in the process of planning for the 2018 funding year. So we're looking out, thinking about the wireless access points, the internet access that you'll be deploying, installing next summer, and planning and procuring those services right now.
All right, John. Let me interrupt you very briefly about while you're talking about understanding the process. In your work, what do you find is the biggest misconception that you hear from schools about the E-rate program? About what it can and cannot do. I mean, what do you hear out there when it comes to understanding the process?
Well, there are, it's like many things in life, it's sort of, your experience sort of filters everything. And, oftentimes we talk to schools, for example, that in the past did not receive support for internal connections. This would be wireless access points and data switches and routers. And I've still talked to schools and libraries just even this week that didn't realize that they could apply for these what are called Category 2 discounts. So really understanding what qualifies for support and knowing that this is a different program than it was 3 or 4 years ago. And there are new opportunities, a few new challenges associated with it, but this is not the same program that existed 5 years ago. Obviously, it supports many of the same things, but it functions differently, and there are new opportunities in that. So I would say just understanding that the program has changed, and then really getting up to speed on what those changes entail.
All right, terrific. Well, thanks so much. I'll let you get back to your comments.
Great. Okay. Number 2 in the steps to maximizing E-rate funding are really leveraging this opportunity. And it's one thing to say, hey, there's $4 billion available, but that's just kind of a big number, and that doesn't. How does that translate, to my school or to my library system? And so, I think really internalizing what this opportunity represents is important. Now, E-rate discounts can be applied towards any number of goods and services. They fall into 2 general categories. Category 1 are services that bring information to a campus. These are telecommunication data services, leased data lines, internet access, as well as voice telephone service. And then on campus, there is discounts of 20 to 85% on the purchase of internal connections, as well as maintenance for those devices, and also something called managed Wi-Fi, which is a third-party service for on-campus internet access. Is typically done on a per-student or a per-device basis. And those Category 2 dollars are subject to a 5-year funding cap. So what does this look like for a typical school site or library facility? Well, we ran the numbers for 2015, which is the last year that we've got sort of a complete set of books that have been closed. And this is what we found. First of all, for internet access and telecommunication services, the average site nationwide received about $8,300 in discounts via the E-rate program. That's an average of about a 76% discount on their bills, for a total of just shy of $11,000. So on average, nationwide in 2015, each site that participated in the program was spending about $11,000 for telecommunications and internet access and getting about an $8,300 discount on that bill. Similarly, if you look at the Category 2 discounts, again, these are internal connections, wireless access points, routers and switches and so on. On average, there was about $54,000 in E-rate discounts provided for on-campus networks. That's based on an average 70% discount for a total project cost of about $76,859. We'll just call it $77,000 and change. So nationwide, about $77,000 at each site that was participating in this Category 2 opportunity, receiving about $54,000 worth of discounts. And so, what your particular discounts would end up at would obviously depend upon the need that you have at your particular campuses and the size of the campus, the number of students, or the square footage if you're a library. But this just kind of gives you a sense of the types of dollars that are available for you to help support your internet access, your telecommunications needs, and of course those on-campus networks that are so important. Okay, let's talk a little bit now about the calendar itself. The E-rate rules, I would love to tell you there's very complex special rules that takes special knowledge, and you have to climb some mountain to get the special tablets with all the information on it. It's really not that hard. Much of it just has to do with basic time management, blocking, tackling, understanding the schedule, and making sure you get your paperwork done on time. So knowing the calendar is really right there in the middle of being an effective E-rate applicant. And this diagram kind of gives you just a general sense of what the calendar looks like for this funding year 2018 that we are right now planning for. So we're here. It is the fall of 2017, and the bidding and procurement process for 2018 is already kicking off. So that you can, if you are ready today, if you haven't done so, prepare your Form 470, your RFP, release that information, gather your quotes, gather your bids, and then begin to prepare for the funding requests, which will be submitted via the Form 471 sometime next spring. Now, those final dates for the filing window, the funding request window, have not yet been set, but we expect it will be sometime in the January to March or April timeframe. So somewhere in the first quarter of the year, plus or minus a month or so, we'll be submitting the applications for the 2018 funding year. And then soon after that, the application review process, which is referred to as PIA or Program Integrity Assurance, that will kick off. And then after that, you'll have a funding commitment decision letter, and the actual work can begin, and the flow of discounts via the payment paperwork can start sometime in the fall of 2018, extending all the way until the fall of 2019. The E-rate funding year runs, as I mentioned earlier, from July 1st to June 30th, and for non-recurring projects, one-time installation work, it actually extends until September 30th. So, it was asked earlier, what are some of the impediments to successfully or fully leveraging E-rate dollars? And I would say one of those is just understanding the planning horizon. This fall, we are talking about planning and thinking forward to purchases that will occur between July 1st, 2018, all the way out to September 30th of 2019. So if you are looking at, for example, an internal connections project, you're thinking about deploying Wi-Fi, data switches, and so on, your planning horizon this fall is July 1st, 2018 through September 30th, 2019. And I would encourage you to think for that whole time frame, what will your needs be at all of your various sites? And those are the needs, those are the requirements that should be reflected in the Form 470 and RFPs that you are preparing this fall.
John, I just did have a question about this. It's one thing to know what the calendar dates are when you have to hit those deadlines, but I suppose that there's also for schools a lot of need to gather information and requirements and so on. As you talk to schools, what are the areas that prove to be the bottlenecks in terms of them underestimating how much they have to get done by that deadline in the calendar? Is there any particular areas, pain points that you can point to where they really need a heads up to start gathering the information soon?
I would say that probably the biggest challenge is just not waiting. Obviously, it's sort of human nature, I think, to put these things off. And the sooner you start the process, the sooner you will see it through to completion. And the most effective applicants are acutely aware of that fact. And I think sometimes where they underestimate the process is the E-rate program requires that departments from all across the school district with the library system work together in tandem, and it may be that I need information from another department. So sort of the things I can control, I can get that all done today. But if I need a document or some information from the procurement officer or the finance officer or from the nutritional services director, now I've got to go to them, and they may be out for a couple of days. And so it's these sort of interconnected pieces that sort of tend to slow the process down, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a position where you're not able to get that paperwork or that information done in a timely manner.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the bidding rules now. So I've mentioned several times that we are this fall planning and procuring purchases for 2018. The E-rate program was founded on a principle of strong, fair, and open competition, and there's a great emphasis placed on the competitive bidding process in the FCC's rules and the USAC application review process. So just knowing how to effectively bid out your projects is a very, very important part of getting your funds. The E-rate program requires that all discounted services be competitively bid. The FCC wants to make sure that all these projects are cost effective, that there are the best solutions being delivered the most cost effectively that they can be. The program does not replace current state and local competitive bidding rules. So as an entity, you have and are subject to particular procurement rules today. The E-rate program does not eliminate those. It just adds a few additional requirements on top of your existing state and local competitive bidding rules. What are those? Well, one is the posting of this Form 470. That form simply provides potential vendors with the opportunity to know about the goods and services you're interested in. So that form is posted in the EPC system. It provides an overview of the goods and services that you are procuring, and it also provides an opportunity to include your RFP and access to additional information. So it doesn't replace your RFP if you have an RFP, but you'll post this Form 470 in conjunction with the RFP that you are releasing. And the E-rate program does require that Form 470 be available for 28 days before a contract is signed. So that may be more days than your local bidding rules allow or require, but it is a requirement of the E-rate program that you have this form out there for at least 28 days. On your form, you'll provide a detailed list of the types of equipment you're interested in or the types of services, estimated quantities. If you're interested in any particular brands, perhaps for consistency purposes with your existing network, you are required to consider or equivalent types of equipment. So you can specify if you have a particular brand preference, but in essence, you need to keep your eyes and ears open to other options that may be available to your library system or school system. On that Form 470, you are certifying to a couple of important things. First of all, that you have given cost the greatest consideration of any factors. You are not required to select the lowest cost bid. That is a common misconception. Cost must be given the highest weighting of any factors, but you aren't required to go with the lowest cost bid, but you must give pricing the highest weighting of any factors that you may consider. And I'm actually going to sort of walk you through an example evaluation matrix here in a moment to kind of help you understand what that looks like. As with every bit of the E-rate program, it's very important that you document the work that you're doing. And in this case, it's documenting the vendor evaluation process, keeping copies of the bids, the proposals that you've received, and then showing your work. How did you select these vendors? How did you score them? How is it that you came to select this vendor for this service? And then honestly, or actually just signing the contract before your Form 471 application goes in. Remember, the contract needs to be signed. You need to have a binding agreement with your vendor before your application is submitted on the Form 471. Make sure that when you go through this process that you have a very clearly defined scope of work. When you submit your application to USAC, they will be looking at not just the eligible goods and services that are listed on your Form 471 funding requests, but they'll be going back and seeing, does that tie to the Form 470 that you posted, to the RFP that you released. Make sure that your RFP, that your Form 470 provides a clear picture of what it is you're interested in, and that it ultimately ties to the application, the contract that you signed, and then the application that you've submitted. Another advantage of doing your work early is, it may be that you sort of go through this process, and in the process of getting bids and talking to vendors and evaluating proposals, that you discover maybe you didn't have a big enough picture, or maybe you were kind of going in one direction, and now it seems you might be interested in going a different direction. If you start the process early enough in the fall, if you need to release a new RFP and get new RFP or proposals, you have that flexibility, but only if you start the process early and are diligent about getting those RFPs out there on the street early in the process. Remember, USAC is going to be looking very carefully at all of this: your application, the bids, the proposals you've received, and they'll want to make sure that you've gotten cost-effective solutions, that you had a fair, open competition, and that you have carefully and accurately described all of the goods and services that you are interested in and indeed have committed to receiving from a particular vendor. When you submit your application, you need to be able to take all of those details and map it all the way down to an individual school or library facility. They'll want to know where equipment's being delivered, what speeds are the data lines, and so on. And so really being able to account for all of that starts with having a very effective competitive bidding process. Now, I mentioned a little bit about the vendor-specific language, and this is a question that comes up quite a bit with schools and libraries. Again, they may have some familiarity perhaps with a particular manufacturer, or kind of an installed base of equipment that they're interested in continuing to use, and things that will just plug into that. And the FCC certainly recognizes that those factors are there. At the same time, they want to encourage and indeed require that schools are looking at the most cost-effective solutions that are out there in the marketplace. And again, this is where the FCC requires that schools and libraries consider or equivalent. So oftentimes you will see perhaps a particular brand that says here brand X, model 1, 2, 3. And if you're interested in that, you need to include and consider equipment that is equivalent to that. Along with all of this, it's important to understand just the basic competitive bidding conduct that is required of both applicants and service provider. For applicants, you are expected to treat all vendors equally. There should be no special advantage given one vendor over another. They should all have access to the same information and facilities. If there are bid meetings and so on, all of that needs to be done in such a manner that it is clear to all parties that this is a fair, open competition. And again, you have state and local bidding rules that most likely govern most of this anyway, so we're probably not adding to the list. More likely we're just sort of underscoring or emphasizing the fact that you want as open and fair competition as possible. And when that happens, it really benefits everyone. Having as many voices around the table, as many ideas and potential solutions is really a win-win for schools and libraries. On the flip side of things, vendors, there are some guidelines, specific guidelines for what vendors can and cannot do. They cannot help draft or prepare that Form 470 or RFP language. You don't want to really even take sort of a boilerplate or sample RFP from a vendor. It's important that that information, that those guidelines all be developed separate and apart from vendors that may participate in the program. And sometimes that's done in really in ways that are not necessarily nefarious or without ill intent behind it, but it can create an appearance that there was someone had their foot in the door or some special advantage when maybe there even wasn't. So err on the side of really avoiding any appearance of impropriety, and just do not accept any kind of boilerplate language or RFP, sample RFP from a vendor. The good news is there are plenty of examples out there, other school districts and so on, that typically are available to help provide some of that information. And of course, vendors cannot themselves help in the evaluation or selection process. It's a pretty rare situation, but sometimes that does come up. So going along with this whole competitive bidding conduct, you want to be very aware of the communication that takes place. If a vendor wants to come in and talk to you, maybe sort of show their wares, give you the pitch on why their equipment is the best and all the new bells and whistles, that's certainly appropriate, and having an informed marketplace is important. If you do entertain any particular vendors, it's important that you have that door open for all interested parties. So if they want to come in and talk to you about the product offerings, great. Just make sure that you are opening that door for all vendors to come in. And along the way, it's very important that you document all of your activities. If you have any correspondence with the service provider, it's good to just keep all that information. You may be asked to provide it later, and it will provide you with the type of protection that you need to demonstrate that indeed you have fulfilled all of these requirements and done everything you can to provide vendors all with equal information and equal access. If you don't have the documents to prove that, though, it can make it rather difficult. When you are selecting that vendor, when you've gone through this whole process and you've gotten those RFPs and waited 28 days, there are a few important steps that you really need to make sure you are addressing. Number one is just keeping documentation of all of that, and specifically when it comes to the evaluation process, being able to show how you chose your vendor and that the correct weighting was given to the different factors. So let me just kind of give you an example here. You may have 100 points that you use to score a proposal from a vendor, just like you would score a term paper or a test. There's 100 possible points in this example, and you give the cost of eligible goods and services the highest weighting of any factor. Remember, price must be the highest weighted factor, not the only factor, but the highest weighted. So in this particular example, 30 points for ineligible goods and services, another 25 for ineligible goods and services, and then experience, location, compatibility. There are 10,000 different variations on this. Your rubric does not have to add up to 100. It could add up to 50. It doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, the cost of eligible goods and services must be given the highest weighting of any of those factors. And so in a typical scenario, you've got that scoring rubric, and then you receive the proposals, and you provide a score for each vendor for each one of those categories. And at the end of the day, you take the vendor with the most points. In this case, it would be vendor B came out on top. And this is the type of documentation that USAC will be looking for to document, to demonstrate how it is you came to select that particular vendor and to choose those types of goods and services. So the criteria may vary somewhat, the number of bids you receive, and so on. This could all look very different, but they'll be looking for this type of analysis, this type of matrix to help document how that process worked.
Okay. John, let me just interrupt you there for a brief minute. I have a question from Craig who wants to know, it relates to vendors, and he says, what if he has experience with vendor X but not vendor Y and is going to be doing the implementation himself? How can you sort of give him some guidance on how he would be impacted and what he would have to do there?
Well, the first thing I usually tell applicants is, when it comes to, it's a very easy draw to want to go to that particular vendor that you've worked with, you have that comfort level, and so on. But when you a well-constructed RFP that has those criteria out there will really help guide that process. And it may be that you end up selecting that same vendor, but it may also be that you go through that process, you do those different scoring, and you find that, gosh, you know what, this other vendor, when I step back and sort of look at all this, they kind of came out on top. So a well-constructed process, if you trust the process, if you design it well, you think through your criteria and lay that out there, really at the end of the day, trusting that process once you've put it in place, I think you'll have good results. So it's a little scary, it's a little challenging, but it's all about helping to identify good solutions that are cost effective.
Okay, good. Well, I have just one more question before I let you go on, and this one comes back in your presentation to the question about eligibility. And Lorna writes, we're a 40% school, and in the past we're not eligible. What level would we expect the program to fund in the 2018 season?
Yeah, so this is a perfect example of schools that in the past didn't get that funding, now kind of stepping out, putting their toes back in the water for a school site that that is a school. Let's just say you've got 100 students at a school building. To calculate your Category 2 budget cap, you take the number of students that are at that facility, multiply it times $153, and then that 40% discount will give you the actual cap for that facility. So the number one point there is just to say those dollars are available. They're available to every site in America. It doesn't matter if you qualify for a 40% discount or a 60% discount. You can receive some discount on your internal connections, and a 40% discount is pretty good. That's a pretty good coupon to cut, and so any applicant, any school site, any library facility that hasn't yet applied for Category 2 discounts can do so. And again, it's either based on a per student or a square footage basis for a library. So in my little example here, if there's 100 students, that'll be about a $15,300 project, and the E-rate program will provide a discount of $6,120 on that. That's just 40% of that $15,300. So there's lots of information out there. You can find out more about calculating those budget caps, but understanding that you can get that discount on that internal connection equipment is really important because we all know that the schools and libraries really need that support. So I've got a few I've got just a few sort of closing thoughts to share with you, and that is to stay alert for changes. You know, the E-rate program is dynamic. There are changes. Obviously, there are changes currently in Washington, D.C. that are leading to changes in the E-rate program. There's new leadership at the FCC, new commissioners, and we fully expect to see that over time there will be changes in the program. It is a work in progress. USAC itself, the E-rate program administrator, is currently in the midst of a search for a new CEO, and that ultimately will lead to changes as well. Most of these changes, the specific timeframes associated with them are unclear. For the most part, we don't expect to see significant changes to the E-rate program for the 2018 funding year. So the things you can go out and plan and procure, you should be doing that. You don't need to worry and sort of hold back wondering if there's changes coming. There likely will be changes in 2019 perhaps, most likely in 2020 or beyond. That also underscores the importance of taking advantage of leveraging that Category 2 option. Just again, like that question was there, hey, we get a 40% discount. Can we get Category 2 discounts? The answer is yes, you can. Will those still be there 3 years from now, 4 years from now? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows, probably. And no matter what the changes look like, there will be some changes. So it's good to today take full advantage of those opportunities to apply for internal connections and so on. And then we'll see. Again, I'm hopeful that the new leadership at the FCC as well as the USAC will continue to look at ways to further enhance, further improve the program. But keep your eye on this. Be sure and subscribe to the USAC newsletter. Funds for Learning also publishes a weekly newsletter. Read those sources. Keep an eye on them as you plan for and prepare for the next funding year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, John. I'm going to just quickly shoot another question at you before you hand things over to Bruce.
Okay.
And this is a question from Paul, who's talks. His school is undergoing a major remodel, and he wanted to know whether the cable and switches, as well as the cost of the installation, are eligible.
Yes, installation, configuration, those types of services all qualify for support. So you will, if you are looking at a major project, you can request not only the equipment itself, the routers, switches, wireless access points, but also the data cabling, the installation work, the configuration, if there are shipping charges, pretty much any of the ancillary costs associated with getting that equipment into your building, up and running on your network, will be covered under the internal connections category. So that's a great question, because many times we see applications go in and maybe it's just for the equipment itself, and then the school's technology staff are left to get it installed, and they don't have enough hours in the day to do all the work that they have to do already, let alone get that new equipment installed. So be sure to include that in your RFP. If you're interested in having installation configuration work done, you can certainly include that, and certainly up to your Category 2 budget, USAC will provide discounts for those types of goods and services. All right, and now I think Bruce. Mm-hmm. You bet.
All right, thank you, John. That was a great rundown on the E-rate program and all the questions coming in. So I just want to encourage people, if you have more questions, continue to add them to the Q&A list there, and we will wrap them up at the end. I wanted to give a quick rundown following on to this discussion about eligible solutions for E-rate. So there is in the Category 2 for E-rate, the internal connections that John mentioned before, Wi-Fi and switch infrastructure and all of the connections that move the packets and the bits and the bytes within your school are eligible for funding. And in particular, we produce a Wi-Fi solution as Xerus. We've been in the market about 12 years, and education has been historically our largest market. So if you're not familiar with us as a company, here's just a little bit of information about us. Deployed in many networks around the world, and have been part of Riverbed since April 2017. So you may be hearing the Riverbed name. You may be familiar with Xerus in the past, but we are part of Riverbed as of the last 5 months or so. So I was going to just talk a little bit about the solutions that we have, so you can see, the types of eligible solutions for technology that are available to you. In particular, for Wi-Fi, there's an infrastructure of access points that you deploy, throughout your school, as well as switches, which I'm not showing here, but those are also some products that we deliver for the solution. And then there's a whole set of services and applications that run on top of that complete the solution and allow you to deliver a Wi-Fi connectivity service to your students, to your teachers, and your faculty. That's all part of the Xerus offer. One of the key things that we deliver is integration directly with Microsoft Office 365 and Google. So if you are a Google Apps user, which many schools are, I know here in the U.S., or Microsoft Office 365, you have moved to a cloud-based delivery mechanism for, delivering content to your students, using Chromebooks, for example, in tandem with Google application systems. And what we've done is added a single sign-on capability where a single sign-on from your student to the laptop will also log them into the Wi-Fi at the same time. So in other words, the laptop can't go anywhere, cannot do anything on the Wi-Fi unless they authenticate as a Google user. So if somebody else picks it up, they can't even use that Wi-Fi or that laptop to connect to the internet. So this helps to create a greater level of security. Also simplifies the deployment of the technology in your school because you can integrate directly with systems that you're already using and making the Wi-Fi as seamless as possible to your students. Same thing with Office 365 through Microsoft Azure. So that's in a solution called EasyPass that we have to simplify the connectivity of Wi-Fi for your laptops, devices, whatever you're supporting on your network. That's a huge challenge sometimes when you have thousands of students and teachers that you need to connect. How do I do that simply? We have focused that in the EasyPass solution to make that as easy as possible. Another item that is very interesting for schools is the deployment in temporary events. So you may have high-density needs for Wi-Fi in, say, in gymnasiums for temporary events, maybe graduations, could be outside, sporting events, things like that. It is very easy to put one of our solutions up on a tripod and run an event for a temporary period of time for hundreds of users and do that very quickly and easily. That's another benefit of our solution in terms of supporting high-density connections. Kind of just summarizing some of the value propositions for what Xerus does with our solutions. We make it very simple. We deliver a cloud network service through the cloud. You can provision everything in the cloud and then simply plug in the access points and things are up. So when you're deploying across many schools, that makes it very simple to deploy. It is secure through EasyPass, like I talked about. You can create secure Wi-Fi connections so that you're not compromising student privacy or information that might be accessible on the network. You can lock that down and ensure that you have total security of your data and your users. And then finally, scalability, supporting many, many users. We have some schools that have open BYOD policies for students to bring in their smartphones, et cetera, and you can run into situations in libraries or auditoriums or student centers with hundreds of users trying to access the Wi-Fi at once. And we do that better than anybody in the industry with our scalable multi-radio solutions that you can learn more about. As far as some of the solutions that are E-rate eligible here, we kind of have a three-pronged approach to pick your solution. A selection of access points depending on your budget levels and your performance requirements. The bottom one there, the high-density solution, is kind of what I referred to a bit earlier, available in a portable scenario, but can get very high-density scenarios that can support unique use cases like even testing, like say Common Core testing, where you have areas, computer labs that you set up temporarily to support online testing. It can be an easy way of running Wi-Fi to support those kind of scenarios. We support either a cloud or an on-prem management, and then you can pick the term for your support or your subscription, either 3 or 5 years. So we make it easy to kind of walk through and select the options that work best for you when it comes to deploying wireless in your school. And I'll wrap it up with just saying, if you need further help on that, let us know. If you're interested in these solutions or more about E-Rate, you can contact us or Funds for Learning. And also, we have an E-Rate resource center there. You can see the URL, and that includes a calculator, by the way. So if you know some of the parameters in terms of your discount level and number of students, et cetera, you can plug in the numbers, and it'll spit out the amount of funds that you are eligible for within your school. All right. That's a quick update from our side. I'm going to pass it back over to Andrew to wrap it up with any further questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you, John, for a great discussion of the changes in the E-Rate and what's happening and the opportunities. We still have 5 minutes remaining, so let's try and tackle as many of the remaining audience questions as we can. John, I'm going to come back to you, and the first question is about the 486 forms, and someone has heard that 486 forms won't be reviewed or processed by USAC until November. Is that correct?
Well, on any given day, things sort of fluctuate. So if you've got a Form 486 to get submitted, you should go ahead and get that submitted. If there are certain glitches or challenges associated with the EPC system, so there are, I believe, a certain number of 486s that are kind of tied up due to a glitch in their system, and they're waiting for the rollout of a new software patch to process that. So it would not be completely unheard of, or it doesn't sound terribly foreign to me if that's what you'd be told, if that's what you've been told. I would not, however, just sort of take that, in general. If you've got a specific form that you are waiting to have processed, and again, the Form 46 is the form necessary for payments to flow, and there is a deadline for that to be processed, you should specifically reach out to the Schools and Libraries Division Customer Service Center, get a case number, if you need to sort of escalate that up, and indeed you may find that USAC comes back and says, oh yes, this particular application, this particular FRN is tied up for this situation. But you want to treat every situation individually, because we've seen the opposite, in which a school or a library has heard about issues, and then they've just assumed that their form was one of those, and then missed out because it actually wasn't. They thought that they had certified a form and they hadn't. They thought it was pending, but then assumed that it was tied up waiting for a software fix, when in reality they had failed to certify that form by pressing a certain button in EPC. So they need to check. That might be the case, but they should check on their specific situation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I want to also come back. Someone from the audience asked a question that refers back to earlier in your presentation, where you had discussed the formula for calculating the discount. Could you go back and explain again how that formula works for the discount?
Yes. The Category 2 discounts, again, we're talking about internal connections, are capped over a 5-year period. You have basically a one-time shot for these Category 2 discounts at a particular site. And the discounts are capped based on either the number of students at your facility, or if you are a library, the square footage. There is a minimum floor. So if it's a very small school, there is a minimum floor. It's a little over $9,200. But let's just say we're talking about a school. If you take the number of students and multiply that by $153 and some change. So just $153 for purposes of this, since I'm explaining math. Multiply the cap times the number of students, and that gives you the overall project cost that the E-Rate will support. Remember I said on average that there was about $76,000 in total expenditures for these E-rate Category 2 projects in 2015. So you find out what that total cap was, and then multiply it times your particular discount rate. So I pulled up the chart here. In 2015, the average one-time savings was $54,000, and that was based on a total expenditure of $76,000. So take the number of students, multiply it times this factor of about $153. That will give you that total cost. In this case, it averages out to about $76,000. And then multiply it times your discount rate, which on average is about 70%, and you'll get the amount of E-rate discounts that are available to you. In 2015, that averaged out to about $54,000 per site for schools and libraries.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and which is a pity because there are some tremendous questions that have come in from the audience. Let me just tell anyone who did ask a question in the last few minutes, if we did not get a chance to answer it, someone from the Riverbed Xerus team will follow up to get you an answer to that question. So, as we wrap up today, I want to thank John Harrington and Bruce Miller again for a really excellent presentation. And I'd also like to thank Riverbed Xerus for its support today. And one final reminder, we will be sending out an email to everyone who attended when the recording of the webinar is ready. So thank you, and this concludes today's webcast. Goodbye.